Waiting for Facebook to boot up here. Hey guys, I'm really excited to come talk to you tonight. I'm sitting back here in my private office. I know this is one that I don't usually record in, so this might be a new background for me. But I just wanted to come and talk to you guys for a couple minutes. I just had the privilege of wrapping up a meeting. We do this every week, and by the way, as I'm recording this, it's almost 10 o'clock at night on a Monday evening. I'm still at the office. That's okay. One of the cool things we've been doing this season, really since the beginning of September, is every Monday night I have a group of students. They're all college kids between 18 and 22 or 23 years old that come in on Monday nights voluntarily, not mandatory, and they do management training and leadership training with me, and it's been a lot of fun. We do a range of topics ranging anywhere from how to lead people, how to manage yourself, time management, how to manage stress, and all the things going on. Kind of cater that one specifically to the students. We've talked about managing money and how to build wealth, and I've shared a couple of controversial things that I've learned over the years. Tonight, actually, we were talking about managing people and having tough conversations, and it was a lot of fun having a bunch of students and kids role playing and acting as if they were an office owner managing a staff that had had a tough week, and had an absolute blast doing that with them. And they just left here, and I wanted to come talk to you guys for a little bit. And I wanted to share something that it's not a story that I share often. It's one I'm a little bit ashamed of, if I can be honest, but it is in my background. It's a real story, and I hope it can bring some value to you guys. So I used to think that I was good with money. When I was 16 years old, I got my first job ever. It was working under the table on a farm doing manual labor. At the time, I don't remember exactly. I think minimum wage was around $6.50 an hour, and I was making $5.25 an hour. But at 16, that was the only job I was able to get, and I didn't know at the time I was being paid under the table. It was like years later when I realized, like, oh, that's why they took me out behind the shed and paid me in cash in a white envelope from the bank. Now I get it. But anyway, that was my first job, and then I got a couple of retail jobs. I did the restaurant gig. It was not until I was in my late teens and early 20s that I started doing some entrepreneurship and sales and marketing and all those things, the cool stuff. But anyway, when I got my first job ever working on the farm, my brother got me a book. I've got a copy of it here in the office. I should have grabbed it before I started recording, but whatever, here we are. It's called The Richest Man in Babylon. And one of the core concepts from the book is save 10% of everything you earn. That is yours to keep. It's not for bills. It's not for spending. And you save it. And I started doing that. And I was like, cool, that's really cool. I was making $5.25 an hour, so I wasn't saving a lot. But I was starting to get a little accumulation in my bank account. And, you know, just like any kid, eventually I found something I wanted to buy, and I cleared out the savings for it, and realized later that the savings was not supposed to be spent on fun stuff. It was supposed to be like saved, you know. But either way, I figured that out. And then after a while, my family was recommending that I get a credit card. Some people at school, like counselors and stuff, were recommending I get a credit card and start building a credit history. So I did that, and I was paying it off every month and accumulating some points, and that was cool. And my family was telling me that I was really responsible and good with my money, and I believed them, even though now in hindsight, none of them ever saw my bank accounts. None of them really knew. They just knew that I had a credit card and paid it off, and that was the extent of it. But either way, my family told me I was good with my money, and I thought I was good with my money, so I believed them. And it really wasn't until later that I figured out that I wasn't very good with my money, and I got a pretty rough surprise. One thing I have learned after all of this, but it resonates with me a lot, is that money doesn't make you good, money doesn't make you bad, it just makes you more of who you already are. So at the time, I was dealing with very small amounts. I think even my credit card, like maximum, was $2,500 or $5,000. Like, you know, at that time when I was in my 20s, it was a lot of money, but in hindsight, it was a small amount to be able to fool around with or make a fool of myself with. But either way, so thought I was doing well. I was really developing some bad habits that I didn't know were bad at the time. And I remember vividly, I was uncertain about investing. I didn't really know how the stock market worked. It kind of confused me, and I allowed myself to be confused, and therefore allowed myself to not find the answer. So I knew it was something I didn't know enough about, but I didn't do anything about my not knowing. I made lots of excuses. And then at one point, I got an inheritance. Some of you guys have heard part of this story. It's really sad. My parents both passed away when I was really young. I was 3 years old. My grandparents adopted me. I grew up with them. And I'll tell you 100%, I would have rather had my parents than had the money. But because they passed away, my father had been enough foresight to set up a trust for me. So I inherited a pretty big chunk of money. And when I turned 25 years old, I inherited $250,000. So I confess, I was a trust fund baby. But I'll be honest with you, money doesn't make you better. Money doesn't make you worse. It just makes you more of who you are. And I thought that I was good with my money. So I set aside, I forget the exact number now. I think it was like $25,000. It was like 10%. I forget if I did pre-tax or after tax, but either way, I set aside some money into a Roth IRA. Thought that was pretty smart. I paid my taxes, obviously. At that time in my life, I wasn't tithing, so I didn't do that at that time. But if I could do it over again, I would. And then the rest of the money, I was like, cool. I read the book, Richest Man in Babylon. 10% of my money is mine to keep. The rest of it, whatever. So I spent it all. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know now what I bought. $250,000. Now after tax and after 15 or 20 grand in savings, it was probably more like 150,000 or 100. I don't know. I don't even know. Either way, I know for certain I bought an iPad, and I'm an old man now, so I bought an iPad, didn't have any numbers after it. There was no 2.0 or 3 or whatever, just it was the iPad, the only one. I bought that, and everything else I couldn't tell you, but the rest of the money was gone. I know I didn't buy a car, I didn't buy a house. I couldn't tell you what I did, so I blew it, and it didn't take long. It was less than a year that I didn't have any money. In fact, not only did I not have any of the cash left, I was in debt. I had $20,000 in credit card debt now, and I had a staff, and I was paying receptionists and employees, and I couldn't pay their payroll. And I remember so vividly, I'm ashamed of this now, but I hope that hearing the story brings some value to you. I was so upset. My girlfriend at the time had offered me a trip to come up to New England and visit with her family, and I was like, yeah, I need that. I need to get away from my business. And while I was with my girlfriend, I didn't know this was going to happen. I should have known it would happen. But one of my employees called me and said, hey, my check bounced, right? And I was like, oh man, I want so badly to make this right, but I'm in New England. There's not much I can do right now. And I remember that was such a source of shame for me that I had gone from, overnight $250,000 to not being able to write a check for my employees that wouldn't bounce. It was bad. And then not too much farther down the road, I got married, and I would not to the girlfriend I was visiting in New England, but got married, and I was better, but I wasn't good. And many of you already know, right? When you get married, your spouse's debt becomes your debt, and my debt became her debt. We combined it, and it was bad. And I remember having a freak out moment when we got a call from the IRS, and I had messed up something with my taxes, and I owed them like $10,000. It was an honest mistake, but they don't care. Some of you guys know that from experience. And I owed them 10 grand, and they were, when the IRS comes for your money, they don't play gentle. And I had to give them the cash, and I was like, man, I don't have it. And I remember that for me was the pivotal moment where I kind of broke down, and I was like, I'm doing something wrong. Something has to change. And I stopped listening to people tell me I was good with my money. I stopped allowing myself to make excuses for myself, and I stopped allowing myself to be confused. And I started changing things. I made a commitment that I was going to learn. I started studying books. I found books on the topic. I asked people that I knew who were wealthy for advice on what to read. I found a couple coaches that I knew had built some wealth, and they could train me what they knew. And over the course, it took a little while, but over the course of a couple years, I ended up coming out with an entirely new outlook on what money looks like. And I'll tell you, it was a process for sure to go from all of that debt to now zero debt, now having money in the bank. And I don't say this to brag or show off, but just to give you an idea of the transformation financially, we are now completely debt free except for our home. We don't use credit cards for anything, even for business expenses. I'm no longer tempted by the points on the credit cards or the airline miles. As much as they're nice and I would like to have them, I've gotten myself in trouble before, and I'd rather just avoid the temptation, right? Just like, whatever, I was going to make an analogy. That's probably not a good one, so never mind, but you might be able to imagine what it was going to be. Either way, I avoid credit cards now, just don't use them, got myself in trouble, got burned, learned my lesson, but we're debt-free except for our home. Some of you guys saw the video where we just bought a Tesla and we're able to pay for it in cash, in full, and I was able to hook it up exactly how I wanted it. So that was awesome. We have $100,000 in savings and different investments and stuff for the future. And we travel. And one of the cool things is that we've been able to travel to some pretty exotic places like Malaysia to Alaska. We've been to Costa Rica, Panama, Ireland, Prague twice, been to some cool places, but one thing I'm also proud of is that we've chosen not to travel a couple times. A couple times that we could have gone somewhere cool and exotic, we said, hey, we have other things that we should be doing with our money right now, making better decisions. And I'm proud that as much as we're able to do cool stuff, we also have the discipline to not do all of the cool things that would be unwise. So we've come a long way. And what I really didn't expect was who I would become, and my wife and I, who we would become in the process. By the way, if you can see in the background, that's her right there. That picture is actually from our wedding day, which is kind of cool. So keep that in the office. Either way, I had no idea who we'd become in the process. We're more confident now. We're much more stable. Our relationship is better. Some of you may have heard that the number one cause for divorce in America, first off, it's irreconcilable differences, which personally, I don't really believe in that. But number two, it's money, right? The number one cause of fights is money. And we really don't have that anymore. We're less stressed, both individually and as a couple. For me personally, as a manager and as a leader for my team, I'm able to be a better leader for them. And it's not about having toys to show off or pictures of travel to show. It's about me being a better version of myself. And most importantly, my future is more secure. And quite honestly, this isn't sexist or whatever, but as the husband for my wife and the father of my future kids, it's not my duty to provide for them per se, but I want it to be, you know? So I want to make sure that I'm leading my family, and I feel able to do that much better now than I was even a few years ago when we were having all our struggles. So I hope there's some value in my story for you. I hope that you guys take something from that. And more than anything, you know, what I'm doing now is really working to help a new generation of entrepreneurs and business owners develop the system so they can become a better version of themselves and, quite frankly, avoid some of the mistakes and the errors that I've made in my past. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.